10 consecutive nights of American airstrikes on Iran, 3 dead American soldiers. A Kuwaiti power and desalination plant hit twice in 2 days. And then, on July 21st, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps put out a statement claiming its aerospace force had done something it had never quite framed this way before, launching several cruise missiles at the central data infrastructure of an American company in Bahrain and destroying it. Not a military base, not a warship. A cloud computing facility belonging to Amazon. And what happened next, or rather, what didn't happen next, tells you almost everything about how strange and how calculated this entire information war has become. So let's walk through exactly what Iran claims it did, what's actually been verified, and why the American response might be the most quietly significant part of this entire episode. Here's the statement as it was actually released, distributed through Iran's Mehr news agency in Tasnim on July 21st. The IRGC's Public Relations Office said its aerospace force, in continuation of what it called the 24th wave of Operation Nasr II, acted in response to what it described as aggression by the American military against under-construction civilian facilities at a site called Darkaveen, and in that response, attacked the central data infrastructure of the American company Amazon in Bahrain with several cruise missiles and destroyed it. That same wave, according to Iranian state media, also included a strike on a United States radar station at Muharraq and a combined missile and drone attack on a Patriot air defense battery at Riffa, both inside Bahrain. Notice what's happening in that combination. Iran didn't just claim a random hit on a tech company sitting off to the side of the war. It bundled a commercial data center into the exact same target package as a military radar installation and an air defense system, treating a facility that stores banking records and business data as a legitimate military-grade objective right alongside genuine defense infrastructure. That's a deliberate signal, and it's worth sitting with for a second, because it tells you Iran now considers American corporate infrastructure sitting inside the Gulf to be fair game in this war. Not collateral damage, not an accident, a target. Now, let's talk about why Iran says it did this in the first place, because the timeline actually matters here. The Atomic Energy Organization of Iran stated that an American strike hit the Darkhaven nuclear power plant at approximately 3:39 in the morning, local time on July 19th. Central Command had confirmed the night before, on the evening of July 18th Eastern Time, that it had completed a round of strikes on Iranian military infrastructure, describing the target package as coastal surveillance and air defense facilities, maritime capabilities, and missile and drone storage sites aimed at continuing to degrade Iran's military capabilities, and separately confirming that American forces had also targeted IRGC units responsible for attacks against American service members in Jordan on July 17th. Notably, CENTCOM's own statement never specifically confirmed that the Darkhaven nuclear site itself was a named target, even though Iranian state media and Iran's own nuclear energy watchdog insisted it was hit directly. The International Atomic Energy Agency said publicly it was looking into the reports of that overnight strike. Iran's atomic energy body didn't hold back in its own statement, calling the strike a violation of international law and describing the American action in openly hostile terms, framing Darkhaven as a symbol of Iranian national dignity and self-reliance rather than a legitimate target, despite the fact that construction on the current reactor only restarted back in December of 2022, and the IAEA has previously indicated the site contained no nuclear material at all. Roughly 48 hours after that overnight strike, the IRGC's Amazon claim landed. That gap matters, because it tells you this wasn't some spontaneous, immediate tit-for-tat. It was a deliberate, prepared retaliation, timed and framed specifically to draw a direct line from an American strike on a nuclear-linked facility to an Iranian strike on American corporate cloud infrastructure sitting a few hundred kilometers away. Here's where the story gets genuinely interesting, because this wasn't actually the first time this specific target has come up in this war, not by a long shot. Since the conflict against Iran began back in March of 2026, Amazon's cloud computing arm, AWS, has reportedly had its facilities hit on at least 5 separate occasions, with 4 of those 5 strikes specifically targeting infrastructure inside Bahrain. That makes this the first time in this entire conflict that the data centers belonging to a major American technology company have become a repeated, named target of actual military action. Not cyber attacks, not sanctions, actual cruise missiles and drones aimed at physical buildings. The regional facility in question, AWS's Middle East South 1 region based in Bahrain, was Amazon's very first cloud region established anywhere in the Middle East, serving as the digital backbone for banks, businesses, and government agencies scattered across the entire Gulf. According to Amazon's own publicly available health dashboard, that Bahrain region has been marked as disrupted continuously since March 1st, meaning the very first wave of strikes back at the start of this war already knocked the facility into a degraded operational state that Amazon has apparently never fully resolved. Additional attacks reportedly followed in April, adding further damage on top of whatever hadn't already been repaired. And Iran hasn't stopped at Amazon either. Iranian forces have previously claimed strikes against an Oracle data center located in Dubai, and separately issued direct threats against OpenAI's Stargate facility in the United Arab Emirates, a site reportedly representing an investment in the range of $30 billion. Iran also reportedly issued warnings naming 18 separate American technology companies it considers linked to United States military and intelligence activity, including Microsoft, Intel, Cisco, and Google, effectively putting the entire American tech sector's regional footprint on notice that it could become a target in this war. That's a genuinely new front in modern warfare, and it's worth pausing on just how unusual it is. This isn't a cyber attack aimed at stealing data or knocking a website offline for a few hours. This is a government using actual cruise missiles and drones against the physical buildings that house the servers running cloud infrastructure for an entire region's banking and business sector. If you wanted a single data point proving how thoroughly modern warfare now blurs the line between military and economic targets, this is it. So naturally, the next question is whether any of this actually happened the way Iran says it did, and this is where the story takes its first genuinely strange turn. Neither Amazon, nor Bahraini officials, nor the Pentagon offered any immediate confirmation of the July 21st claim. Bahrain's government did state that its air defenses had intercepted the incoming attack and reported no casualties, but notably did not identify Amazon specifically, and did not confirm that any commercial infrastructure had actually been struck. Some observers online pointed to Amazon's own AWS Health dashboard, which showed the Bahrain region listed as disrupted, treating that as proof the strike had succeeded. But that interpretation ran into an immediate problem, because that same dashboard had already been showing the Bahrain region as continuously disrupted since March 1st, meaning there was no way to tell from the dashboard alone whether this specific claimed strike had caused any new damage at all, or whether people were simply looking at months-old disruption and mistaking it for fresh confirmation. In other words, the loudest piece of evidence being passed around as proof turned out to be essentially meaningless the moment you checked the actual timestamps. And this wasn't even Iran's only questionable claim during that exact stretch of the war. Just days earlier, Iran had claimed to have struck a United States base in Syria and killed American troops there, a claim CENTCOM flatly and directly denied, with even a Syrian officer on the ground reportedly confirming that nothing had actually happened at that location. So when the Amazon claim landed right in the middle of that same news cycle, plenty of observers reasonably treated it with real skepticism, given Iran's own recent track record of announcing attacks that simply hadn't occurred. Add to that the fact that Iran, just one day earlier, was also claiming to have destroyed a Patriot air defense system at Riffa and a radar station at Muarak in that same combined operation, and separately claimed to have intercepted two supposedly non-compliant oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz, while yet another tanker reportedly took a hit from an unidentified projectile off the coast of Oman. That's an enormous number of claimed successes packed into an extremely short window, and any single one of them landing without independent confirmation should reasonably raise an eyebrow, let alone all of them arriving stacked on top of each other within the same 48-hour stretch. But here's the twist that genuinely nobody fully saw coming, and it's the piece of this story that changes how you should read everything that came before it. On July 24th, roughly 3 days after that initial Amazon claim, the IRGC put out yet another statement, this time claiming that a follow-up wave of strikes, described as Wave 27 of the same operation, had specifically targeted and destroyed what it called the remaining building at the site, explicitly stating that the facility had provided completed intelligence support to United States forces. Iranian state media then laid out what it described as a full sequence of 3 separate nodes hit across different phases of the war. An earlier northern facility struck during an earlier extended phase of the conflict. An eastern facility hit around July 22nd, and a western facility hit around July 24th. Presenting the picture as the comprehensive neutralization of Amazon's entire regional data infrastructure, rather than a single isolated strike. Amazon still hadn't publicly confirmed any of this. Independent verification remained genuinely limited. But then, on July 28th, just 1 week after the original claim, Bloomberg reported something that shifted the entire calculus. Satellite imagery, released by the IRGC itself through Tasnim, appeared to show real physical damage to 2 separate Amazon data centers inside Bahrain. And Bloomberg's own analysis of those images indicated the damage shown was significant, not the kind of vague, ambiguous imagery that's easy to dismiss as staged or exaggerated. Sit with that for a second, because that's the part of this story that should genuinely surprise you. For the better part of a week, the working assumption among most independent observers was that Iran's Amazon claim was likely inflated propaganda, timed for maximum psychological effect, and probably overselling whatever limited disruption had actually occurred. Then satellite evidence surfaced, suggesting the opposite, that at least some of what Iran claimed may have actually happened, with real physical damage to real buildings housing real cloud infrastructure, serving an entire region's banking and business sector. That doesn't mean every single claim in that barrage of statements from Iran during this stretch was accurate. The Syria claim was demonstrably false, and the tanker interception claims remain unverified. But it does mean the instinct to write off the Amazon strikes entirely as pure fabrication turned out to be premature, and that's a genuinely uncomfortable position for anyone trying to track this war accurately, because it means neither blind belief nor blanket skepticism toward Iranian claims is actually the reliable approach right now. Every single claim has to be checked individually on its own evidence, because Iran has now demonstrated a track record of mixing real strikes with fabricated ones inside the exact same news cycle, which is arguably a more sophisticated information strategy than simply lying outright, because it means even genuine successes get buried under justified skepticism, while genuine skepticism gets undermined the moment satellite imagery proves one of the claims true. It's worth slowing down on that 2-week stretch leading into the Amazon claim, because the density of events packed into it is genuinely staggering and helps explain why Iran felt pressure to produce some kind of dramatic counter-narrative. On July 19th, the American military confirmed that a third service member had been killed in action connected to the broader campaign. Officials said, U.S. forces had located unidentified remains near the site of the earlier attack in Jordan, a detail that on its own tells you how unresolved and raw that specific incident still was, even as the war kept moving forward on multiple other fronts simultaneously. During that same 48-hour window, Iran struck a power and desalination plant inside Kuwait and then struck it again a second time within roughly 2 days, a target choice that has nothing to do with degrading American military capability and everything to do with demonstrating that Iran can still reach into a Gulf partner nation's civilian infrastructure and cause real disruption to something as basic as a country's water and electricity supply. Layer the claimed strikes on the Bahrain radar site and Patriot battery, the claimed tanker interceptions in Hormuz, the tanker hit by an unidentified projectile off Oman, and the Amazon claim all on top of that same compressed timeline. And you start to see the actual strategy at work here. Iran wasn't trying to win any single engagement outright. It was trying to flood the news cycle with enough simultaneous claims of success, real, exaggerated, and outright fabricated all mixed together, that the overall impression left behind was one of Iranian resilience and reach, regardless of how many of those individual claims held up under scrutiny once the dust settled. That flooding strategy is worth naming directly, because it's a recognizable pattern in modern information warfare, and it's exactly what played out here. When a false claim, like the supposed attack on the American base in Syria, gets debunked quickly and clearly, it actually works in the claimant's favor over time in one specific way. It trains observers to expect every subsequent claim to be equally false, which means that when a genuinely damaging strike does happen, as the satellite imagery later suggested with the Amazon facilities, it slips past initial scrutiny wrapped in the same skepticism earned by the previous fabrication. Iran effectively benefits either way. If a claim turns out false, it still generates a news cycle and a moment of uncertainty before being debunked. If a claim turns out true, it often gets dismissed initially as just more of the same exaggeration, buying Iran a period where the real damage isn't being properly registered or responded to by the country actually affected. That's a far more sophisticated approach than simple propaganda, and recognizing it is exactly why treating every single claim in this war as an individual data point, rather than defaulting to broad trust or broad dismissal, has become such a necessary habit for anyone trying to actually track what's happening here with any accuracy. Now here's where the American response comes into focus, and why calling it something nobody saw coming isn't just a dramatic title, it's an accurate description of how unusual this posture actually was. Faced with a claimed strike on major American corporate infrastructure, the kind of event that in almost any other context would generate an immediate, forceful public statement from Washington, the Pentagon said essentially nothing. Amazon said essentially nothing. Bahrain confirmed an intercepted attack without naming a target. No press conference, no retaliatory announcement specifically tied to the Amazon claim, no confirmation, no denial, just silence, sustained for days, even as Iran kept escalating its own public claims about additional waves and additional buildings destroyed. That silence is the something nobody saw coming, because the expected response to an adversary claiming to have destroyed a major American company's regional data infrastructure would normally be loud, immediate, and designed to reassure markets, businesses, and the public that the situation is under control. Instead, the American posture looks a lot more like a deliberate refusal to hand Iran the propaganda victory it was clearly hunting for, denying Tehran the satisfaction of an American statement it could twist into further proof of its own effectiveness, while continuing the actual military campaign against Iran's real military infrastructure, completely unaffected by the noise. And that's really the core insight buried inside this entire episode. Iran, facing 10 consecutive nights of American airstrikes hammering its coastal defenses, its missile and drone storage, its command and control networks, needed something to show its own population and the wider world that it could still hit back in a way that actually landed. A cloud data center makes for a genuinely clever target from a propaganda standpoint, because it's technical enough to sound impressive, vague enough that verification takes days if it happens at all, and tied to an American brand name that means something to ordinary people who've never heard of most military hardware but instantly recognize the word Amazon. Whether or not the strikes fully destroyed what Iran claims, the psychological value of the announcement lands the moment it's published, regardless of what satellite imagery eventually confirms a week later. The United States, for its part, seems to have made a calculated decision that engaging with that psychological warfare on Iran's terms, through public confirmation or denial, would only amplify the exact effect Iran was going for. Better, from Washington's perspective, to let the claim sit unanswered, keep striking Iran's actual military capacity every single night regardless, and let independent satellite analysis sort out the truth on its own timeline rather than handing Tehran a live microphone moment. Go back to the actual outage history here for a moment, because it adds important texture to how seriously this specific vulnerability has already played out over the course of this war, well before the July claims even happened. When the very first wave of strikes hit AWS infrastructure in the region back in March, the damage was severe enough that Amazon reportedly classified the affected Bahrain facilities as being in what's internally described as hard down status, meaning the systems weren't just degraded, they were effectively unusable, for a stretch running from late March into early April. The last update posted to the AWS health dashboard during that period stated plainly that the Middle East Bahrain region was currently unavailable. That's an extraordinary admission for a company the size of Amazon to have on the public record, even briefly, because cloud outages of that scale, for a region serving banks and government agencies across an entire part of the world, are exactly the kind of event companies typically try to manage quietly rather than confirm outright. Whether Amazon has since made meaningful progress, restoring full service in that specific region isn't something the company has clarified in any detail. And the fact that the dashboard has simply displayed continuous disruption since March, without a clear return to fully operational status, suggests at minimum that this is not a problem that's been fully resolved even months into the conflict. There's also a wider pattern connecting this specific strike to something Iran has floated as a threat throughout this entire war, going after the physical infrastructure that keeps the modern internet running, rather than just individual buildings. Earlier in this conflict, Iran had separately raised the possibility of severing undersea fiber optic cables, the physical lines running along ocean floors that connect the Middle East to the rest of the world's internet and financial networks. Threatening cables of that scale sits on a completely different order of magnitude than hitting a single data center, because a cut undersea cable can degrade connectivity across multiple countries simultaneously, rather than affecting one company's regional footprint. And cables like that are notoriously difficult and slow to repair once damaged. Taken together with the confirmed pattern of strikes against AWS, the claimed strike against Oracle in Dubai, and the direct threats issued against OpenAI's Stargate project and 18 other named technology companies, what you're looking at is a regime that has clearly identified digital and economic infrastructure as a deliberate, recurring category of target in this war, not an improvised, one-off idea that happened to come up during a single retaliatory strike. That's a strategic decision, made and repeated across months, and it should reasonably worry any company that's built expensive physical infrastructure across the Gulf under the assumption that a war involving Iran would stay confined to traditional military targets and oil shipping lanes the way most previous Middle East conflicts largely have. Naming Microsoft, Intel, Cisco, and Google specifically alongside Amazon and Oracle also signals something else worth noting, that Iran isn't limiting this list to companies it can currently reach with existing weapons. It's laying down a marker for every major American technology brand with any physical or perceived intelligence-linked footprint anywhere near the region, regardless of whether an actual strike against each of them ever materializes. There's a market and business confidence dimension to all of this, too, one that rarely gets the attention it deserves in coverage that mostly focuses on the military side of this war. Every company currently operating cloud infrastructure, data storage, or AI compute capacity anywhere in the Gulf is now forced to run a genuinely uncomfortable internal calculation, weighing the commercial upside of operating in one of the fastest growing digital economies in the world against the now demonstrated risk that a regional conflict could turn their own physical infrastructure into a named military target overnight. That calculation doesn't just affect Amazon or Oracle or the handful of companies Iran has already named directly. It ripples through insurance markets pricing risk for facilities across the entire region, through sovereign wealth funds deciding how aggressively to keep funding massive data center and AI infrastructure projects, and through the broader strategic planning of governments across the Gulf who have spent years positioning themselves as safe, stable hubs for exactly this kind of digital investment. A single confirmed strike against a named American tech company's infrastructure does more to unsettle that confidence than months of purely military strikes ever could, because investors and executives understand tank battalions and missile bunkers as the normal cost of doing business in a historically unstable region. But a cruise missile aimed specifically at a cloud data center is a different category of risk entirely, one that changes how boardrooms think about geographic diversification for years, not just for the duration of this specific conflict. There's a broader strategic layer sitting underneath all of this too, because targeting cloud infrastructure specifically inside Bahrain isn't a random choice. It's tied directly to the geography and range of Iran's actual missile arsenal. Analysts have pointed out that AWS facilities across the Gulf, including in locations further away like Saudi Arabia's capital region, sit well within the operational range envelope of Iran's Fateh-2 hypersonic missile and its Zulfiqar family of ballistic missiles, the exact same threat radius that already places American military installations like Prince Sultan Air Base inside this conflict's targeting geography. That means that Iran isn't just capable of threatening the handful of facilities it's already claimed to hit, it has the reach to threaten essentially the entire regional cloud computing footprint that American and international tech companies have built up across the Gulf over the past several years, and footprint worth tens of billions of dollars in combined investment, anchored by projects like the Stargate data center in Dubai. If Iran continues treating commercial data infrastructure as a legitimate military target category, and if even a fraction of its more ambitious future claims turn out to be as real as the satellite imagery now suggests this one was, that represents a genuinely new kind of economic warfare risk for every company that's poured capital into building cloud and AI infrastructure across this region on the assumption that a conflict involving Iran would stay confined to military targets and shipping lanes. It's also worth stepping back and asking what this specific episode tells us about how this entire war has evolved compared to where it started. What began as a fight over Iran's nuclear program and then expanded into a battle over control of the Strait of Hormuz has now stretched into a conflict where the actual battlefield includes cloud servers, corporate data centers, and the reputational value of an American brand name that has nothing to do with weapons or oil. That's a genuinely significant escalation in scope, even if the physical damage from any single strike remains limited compared to what's happening to Iran's military infrastructure every single night. And there's a reason to think this trend continues rather than reverses. Iran's conventional military capacity keeps getting degraded night after night by sustained American and Allied strikes, and a regime that's losing ground on the battlefield needs cheaper, more asymmetric ways to keep demonstrating relevance and capability to both its domestic audience and the wider world. Hitting a data center costs Iran a handful of cruise missiles. The psychological and economic disruption that claim generates, verified or not, costs far more than that to manage on the receiving end, in lost confidence, in insurance premiums, in the kind of quiet reassessment every foreign company operating in the Gulf is now being forced to run internally about whether their own infrastructure could be next. So where does that leave the broader trajectory of this war? Reports have separately indicated that elements of the Trump administration were, around this exact same period, reconsidering a far more sweeping strategic option, moving beyond degrading Iran's military capacity and back toward actively pursuing regime change, alongside renewed efforts to encourage an internal uprising inside the country. If accurate, that context reframes everything else happening in this specific news cycle. The Amazon claim, the Dark Oven strike, the 10 consecutive nights of bombing, all of it starts to look less like an open-ended campaign of attrition, and more like the lead-up to a much larger strategic decision that could reshape the entire conflict. Rather than simply continuing to grind it out night after night along the same lines, it's followed for months. Whether that pivot actually materializes into a formal policy shift or gets shelved the way similar options reportedly have been before is genuinely uncertain, but its mere presence in the conversation, reported through credible international financial press rather than speculation, tells you that Washington itself may be treating this stretch of the war as an inflection point rather than just another cycle of strikes and counterclaims. What we can say with real confidence, based on everything that's actually been verified rather than simply claimed, is this. 10 consecutive nights of American strikes did real, measurable damage to Iran's coastal defenses, missile storage, and command infrastructure. Iran did retaliate, including strikes that killed American service members and damaged a Kuwaiti power and desalination facility twice within 48 hours. Iran did claim to destroy Amazon's cloud infrastructure in Bahrain, a claim that was met with total silence from the American side, rather than confirmation or denial, and that silence held even as Iran escalated its own claims further over the following days. And when independent satellite imagery finally surfaced a week later, It suggested at least part of what Iran claimed may genuinely have happened, complicating the easy assumption that this was simply propaganda designed to be dismissed. That combination, a real military campaign grinding forward every single night, layered on top of an information war where corporate data centers have become legitimate battlefield targets, and an American response built around calculated silence rather than public reassurance, is what makes this specific episode worth understanding in detail, rather than scrolling past as just another headline in a war that's produced headlines like this every single week for months. So here's what I want to know from you. Do you think staying silent was the right call from the American side? Denying Iran the propaganda win of an official confirmation or denial? Or do you think that silence actually created more uncertainty and anxiety than a direct statement would have? Especially once satellite imagery started suggesting the strikes may have been real after all. Drop your take in the comments, because this is exactly the kind of question where reasonable people can land in very different places once they've seen the full sequence of events, rather than just the initial headline. If this breakdown helped you make sense of how a war over nuclear sites and shipping lanes somehow ended up including cloud data centers as legitimate military targets, go ahead and hit like on this one. It genuinely helps this kind of detailed source-checked analysis reach more people trying to actually understand this conflict instead of just reacting to whichever claim goes viral first. Subscribing means you'll be here the moment the next wave of claims lands, and given how often Iran has followed one contested claim with another within days, that next wave is probably closer than you'd think. And if you know anyone who's been treating every Iranian claim in this war as either automatically true or automatically fake, share this with them. Because the honest answer, at least based on what's actually been verified so far, is that it's genuinely more complicated than either extreme. And this specific episode is one of the clearest examples yet of exactly why that nuance matters. Thanks for watching all the way through. Stay close to this one, because between the silence from Washington, the satellite imagery still being analyzed, and reports of a much bigger strategic shift potentially forming behind the scenes, this story is far from finished. What started as a fight over centrifuges and missile bunkers has quietly turned into a test of who controls the digital backbone of an entire region. And that's a front line most people watching this war never expected to have to pay attention to.